This video goes with Section 11 of Hansen and Quinn's Greek Unintensive course and covers the persistent accent. You can refer to Hansen and Quinn, page 10, for their coverage of the material, which they revisit in the appendix, pages 602 to 605. This video assumes that you've already taken in the video for Section 10, Rules for Accent. Click in the blue box now if you need to review it. The term persistent in persistent accent comes from the word persist, and it means that on Greek words that have persistent accent, the accent tries to stay, persist, as the same accent and in the same place on the word. An accent will change its nature, for instance from a circumflex to an acute, rather than its position if it can. We've seen persistent accent during the video for the general rules for accent, where we saw that anthropos could have its acute on the first syllable because it was comfortable with the short syllable at the end. Anthropos is the form of the word man or human being that tells us where the accent wants to persist, on that alpha at the beginning of the word. As you'll soon learn, Greek changes the ending of a word to change how it's used in a sentence. So when the ending changes to "u" to mean of a man, keeping the acute on the alpha is now violating the rules for accent, since "u" is long and acutes can't be on the third to last syllable with a long last syllable. So the long last syllable pulls the acute to the second to last syllable in this form of the word. As we look at this more, keep some of the basic rules for accent in mind. Most nouns have persistent accent, and our examples for now will all be nouns. Other words will have persistent accent too, and I'll always specify when I teach you new vocabulary and new forms whether a word has recessive or persistent accent. Let's look at the forms for the word for book, the word for man or human being, the word for island, and the word for drama. Biblion wants to keep an acute over the iota in the second to last syllable. So when it changes to bibliou, of a book, and that last syllable becomes long, there's no problem, since an acute is happy over the penult no matter what the length of the ultima. With anthropos, man, as we saw, the acute on the antepenult, comfortable in this form with its short last syllable, has to move when the last syllable changes to long in anthropou, of a man. But in another form, anthropon, when the last syllable with that nice omicron becomes short again, its accent can move back to the alpha in the third to last syllable, which is where it really wants to be. Now let's look at Nasos, which means island. It wants to have a persistent circumflex over the eta in the second to last syllable, which works fine in this form since it has a short last syllable and that nice long eta in the second to last, and it fits comfortably in the rules for circumflex on the penult. But when it switches to the form that means of the island, Nesu, it has that diphthong in the last syllable, making it long, and the circumflex can't stand it and changes to an acute. One more example. Drama, which does in fact mean drama, wants to have a circumflex over the first alpha. I didn't add a long mark to that alpha to let you know it was long, but the very fact that it has a circumflex tells you that it has to be long, since circumflexes cannot appear over short vowels. The other alpha is short, which you also already knew from the rules for accent if you think about it, since a circumflex can only appear on the second to last if the last syllable is short. Now, when this word changes form to dramatos, so that it means of drama, it now has 3 syllables. So even though the last one is short, the accent on that first alpha can't stay a circumflex, even though it wants to persist because, as you know, a circumflex can't go back that far in a word. So it persists in the same place, but it has an acute accent, which doesn't violate the rules for accent that you've learned. When it becomes dramatone, of the dramas though, the last syllable is now long, so the poor accent can't hold out any longer on that first alpha, and it gets pulled as an acute to the second to last syllable. That's how persistent accent works. I'll show you just a few more examples with the Greek word for fear and one of the Greek words for thing, krema. This time I've gone ahead and shown you the form from the dictionary that shows you which accent wants to persist and on what letter. So with phobos, when it becomes phobu, of fear, even though the last becomes long, the acute is perfectly happy where it is. Phobo, for the fear, also has a last long syllable, but the acute is still happy. Phoboi, fears, has a short last syllable. Remember that exception to the rules that diphthongs are long? Oi, omicron iota, and I, alpha iota, at the very end of the word count as short for the purposes of accent. So again, this is a short last syllable, and again, the acute is perfectly happy on that first omicron, persisting right where it wants to be. Krema wants to have a circumflex and stay over the eta. Krematos, of the thing, has 3 syllables in this form, and the last one is short. So the accent can stay on the eta, but it has to be an acute, since you can't have a circumflex back that far. Krematon, of the things, or of the money, has a long last syllable, so it pulls that acute forward towards it, and you get krematon. One more. When you need the form kremasi, for the things or for the money, that last iota is short. And so the accent can at least go back to the eta where it wants to be, but it has to be an acute instead of a circumflex because it's 3 syllables back. That's what you need to know about persistent accent, and you should be able to put it in practice in drills and in class. If you missed the video on recessive accent, go ahead and get that down before you get to work on the first 2 declensions in Greek, which are what you'll tackle next.